welcome to Color Commentary. We're your popper commentators, Michael Petchik and Adrian Guarzales. How's it going, Adrian?
Good.
Okay.
Why don't you do some upkeep for us, Mike?
Yeah. So starting off this week, we want to talk about some of the ways that you can help support the show. First up is Original Magic Art. They produce a whole bunch of tokens, playmats, dice bags, art prints featuring magic art and art from the rest of the world as a whole. And they do a bunch of really neat stuff. They even have a Pauper token set with classic art from the ages of history. Real neat stuff. We had Josh on the show last year, and really good guy, really puts his all into his products. And if you decide to shop with them anytime in the near future, remember to use the code Commontary, spelled exactly as it is in our name, in all caps, and you will get a 5% discount on your order, and we get a nice little kickback. It helps us out and helps keep the lights on here at Color Commentary headquarters. What do you have for us, Adrian?
Well, clearly you listen to me more than you listen to Mike, because we actually have new patrons. Hello, new patrons. For just as little as $1 per episode, you can hear the full show, including the pre and post shows, which was pretty professional this week. And you get access to our Patreon exclusive Discord channel, which has been decidedly unprofessional this week. So check it out.
Yeah, Discord, not exactly, the most professional of things, but it's a good time. There's been plenty of good discussion. So last week we did promise y'all that we would talk about the metagame. We'd actually, get into the nitty gritty of what's happening now, and no more of these set reviews or looks back on the year. We're diving back in to the filth, but
we got to stay relevant somehow.
Yeah, right. We should actually do the thing that this podcast is supposed to do and talk about this format so that we can actually be a popper podcast, not just two guys with microphones who occasionally talk about magical card games for children. But starting off, we do have one other thing we want to talk about. So GP Santa Clara was this past weekend, and it had the first of the Channel Fireball Pauper side events. It was 3 rounds long, and it fired with 121 players. How awesome is that, Adrian?
That's pretty awesome. I'm looking forward to going one to near me soon. Maybe GP Houston.
Yeah. If you actually confirm that'd be sweet. We could, let followers know, and maybe you'll see some people there who know who you are and you don't know. It's always a fun time.
Oh God, now I don't want to do it.
I always love meeting people who have known my podcast, because I am a horrendously awkward human being, and it will be real uncomfortable because I forget that there are people out there who know more about me than I know about them. But in all seriousness, 120 people is a great turnout. That's bigger than the Card Kingdom Rags to Riches tournament. And obviously, as a side event, it only had 3 rounds, so there wasn't like a cut to top 8 or anything. It's just kind of a fun thing. But with a turnout of that sort of crowd, that's really good. Hopefully, that's more than Channel Fireball was expecting. And hopefully, this can push them towards offering Pauper at future events as well. I'm generally pretty excited about this. You got anything to add on that, Adrian?
Sounds good. Which is a great segue into our next discussion topic. With the influx of new players into the format, the meta has shaken up quite a bit.
Yeah. So we were talking in the pre-show, and I took a look at the metagame as reported by MTG Goldfish. Things have changed pretty drastically. Let's talk about some of these top decks that we're seeing put up results, because first thing I'm seeing here is Affinity back, Adrian?
I think Affinity is sort of like it is in Modern. When people stop playing Gorilla Shaman, Affinity gets way better. And if we look at the decks that are currently up here, like if Elves is the best deck, Elves is not playing Gorilla Shaman, and so Affinity can just sort of do its thing.
So basically what I'm hearing is Gleeful Sabotage is not as disruptive to the game plan as Gorilla Shaman. It's still, a bummer, but it's not, completely burying the Affinity player.
Yeah, I don't think so. And I think Affinity can also have a lot of game against Elves, because you can combo them maybe before they can combo you. So it's not surprising to me to see it here. It's also a deck full of big, beefy things, so I can see it being pretty appealing. Okay. Your mileage will vary based on the number of artifact hate you run into, but it's still a fairly strong deck that's mostly just kept in check by its hate cards.
Yeah, so I think that's a fitting way to analyze its position as the current number one by a very, very slim margin. Like, the worse Gorilla Shaman is to play, the better Affinity gets. And I mean, it's one of those things when a bunch of people are packing Gorilla Shamans, this deck is miserable to play because getting Stone Range repeatedly is not generally conducive to playing any Magic, let alone fun Magic. But you did mention it. So Elves is our second up. And I mean, it's been a while, but Elves every so often just has these chunks of seasons. And I guess what this is it looks like it's mostly off the back of Lead the Stampede. Like, that seems to be the big get here. Is there anything else that sort of has changed to make Elves a better deck, in your opinion?
Not really. Its explosive potential is there. Lead the Stampede lets it come from behind. For all of you out there who are new to the format, the correct version is not the version with Land Grant. I've seen a lot of posts recently asking if Land Grant is the good one. And heck, I've even seen a Land Grant list 5.0. But with Daze in the format, with Counterspell in the format, you do not want to be playing Land Grant in your Elves deck. I think it's I'd
argue that Counterspell is less of an issue than Daze, but Daze certainly can just ruin your opener because Elves can be a one land deck. Doesn't really need to always hit that second land drop, but Daze is a card that people play in this format. So if that starts picking up, I could see this deck getting much, much worse.
Yeah, I'm not really a big fan of Land Grant.
No,
in the format.
It's got its place in Legacy Belcher, and I think that's the only place I've ever seen it played to great effect. All right, next on our list, Is It Delver? And what do you think is propelling the good old bug back up into a position of authority? Because when the last time we really delved into the meta, mono blue Delver was kind of climbing in the ranks. So Is It Delver? Is it just the fact that you get to run spot removal for decks like Elves?
I think so, yes. And also having access to Electrickery and Swirling Sandstorm excuse me, is very powerful. The deck is just a card advantage engine. Basically everything it does is a 2-for-1. And so as long as you can play that game and come out ahead, you're going to be winning games against this meta. So yeah, still a very strong contender. It definitely fallen off for a while, and I kind of written it off a little bit. But it's good to see it coming back. It's an quote unquote old favorite.
Yeah. It was definitely shocking to me when we sort of saw that rise in mono blue Delver where, Is It Delver just wasn't performing, but seeing it sort of re-enter the metagame makes sense. If Elves and Affinity are two of the things you're trying to deal with, having access to Gorilla Shaman and also having access to the combo of spot removal and Electrickery, and specifically spot removal that scales very well in the form of Scred, just make it very appealing, I think, in this metagame. Next up, we have Burn, and this is kind of a surprising one for me because it's been a while since Burn's cracked the top 5 in terms of popularity. And it doesn't look like most of these lists have been doing anything that's all that far out there. So I don't know. Is there something that maybe I'm missing here about why it's seeing a modicum of success again?
I think you're underestimating how many people play Burn. And I think that's really it. Burn is cheap. Burn is $31 online. Like, it's not expensive. Compare that with Is It Delver, for example. Let me just mosey on over there. 119. Elves, 61. Double the price.
Okay.
Affinity, 58. Not too much higher, but I think people really undersell how cheap Burn is. Burn is still a competitive deck. I don't think of it as a tier 1 deck. Certainly a pillar of the format. You got to prepare for it. Mostly, I consign it to the realm of people who can't afford better, or maybe there are some die-hard Burn fans out there. The deck plays similarly to how it does in other formats. It's just worse because we have the gain lands and some other forms of incidental life gain. But if you're looking to get into the format, this might just be the deck that gets you in there.
Yeah, and I'm looking at it, and outside of like a handful of cards, it is a pretty affordable deck online and in paper less so because, all these cards are staples in other formats for their respective Burn decks usually. But looking at online, like Martyr of Ashes, Pyroblast, and like Flaring Pain and Searing Blaze are the only things that really carry much of a price tag to them. So I think the affordability, but I'm also looking at this list. Martyr of Ashes seems like a slam dunk in this sort of format where you're dealing with go wide strategies that quickly populate the board with threats. Like resolving a Martyr of Ashes turn 1 and then being able to say turn 2 onwards, I can just kind of pop this and wipe the board is pretty good. And, you know, your deck is by and large can double as a removal for problematic permanents. So I guess the more we talk about it, the more it kind of makes sense that this would be seeing an uptick in play and also an uptick in 5-0s. All right, so burn out of the way. Next we have Kuldotha Boros, or Monarch, or, you know, these decks kind of have a tendency to get a little lumped in together. And we're starting to see more people trying out Seeker of the Way in these lists and, you know, kind of seeing a little bit more diversity in them. And I think this kind of shocks me that it isn't a little bit higher. And I know you've got more reps with the deck than I do. What are your thoughts on this?
The deck is slow compared to the 4 decks we just talked about.
Yeah.
It takes a while to get its engine going. And so I think that might have something to do with it. Seeker of the Way is definitely an interesting inclusion. It's definitely, if Burn's in the meta, Seeker of the Way is awesome.
Yeah.
So I can see it as a way of combating that. It's also been popularized by, you know, YouTube streamers, Methodical, among others. So it is interesting to see the evolution of the deck. I have not personally tried out the Seeker of the Way version yet, but I think I should grind that axe. I mean, that's not the right term, but you know what I mean. Sharpen that sword a little bit before I head to the GP and see what version of the deck I'd like to play, or even what deck to play at all. I'm actually pretty excited by the possibilities.
Yeah, I've got to imagine that, like, as with any Eternal format, like, my gut reaction to this is like, you're going to a big event, you have no idea what the metagame is going to look like. Just play the deck that you're most familiar with. But I still think that the Boros decks are, regardless of flavor, are a really, really solid deck, even with the format featuring these sort of faster, more combo oriented decks. I have a hard time believing that, like, this very solid value engine that has existed now for, when did Monarch come online? About half a year ago at this point?
Yeah, it's definitely made its way as one of the forerunner decks in the format.
Yeah. Next up, we have the assorted versions of the control-oriented Tron lists. The 4 to 5 color teachings control Tron. Now, I think we are now at a point where I can safely say that Tron is what teachings used to be in the format.
Oh, absolutely.
This is just now the best way if you want to sling removal spells and control effects, counter spells, bounce, you know, capsize locking people. This is the way to go now. And I was actually talking the other night on Twitter. There was that give some unpopular opinions, and I did point out, like, I think that at this point Tron represents the control pillar of this format, and removing it at this point would cause some very, very bad outcomes to the format. But these lists, they're looking pretty much exactly how they were a few months ago. Like, people have been changing the exact tech that they've been playing with, but, you know, we're seeing similar creature bases of, you know, Seagate Oracles, Mnemonic Walls, Muldrifters, a lot of cheap, efficient removal, and then backing that up with counterspells and a lot of over-the-top draw stuff. So I'd have to admit, like, Tron is not one of the ones that surprises me in these, you know, top 10 lists. Is there anything else you want to talk about with regards to Tron?
It's a good deck. Play it, you dummy.
Fair enough. In 7th, we've got Mono Blue Delver, and this has kind of returned a little bit more to the Spire Golem, you know, just very efficient, lots of 4-ofs. Although I'm seeing people start to play Brainstorm in these lists. I don't know about that, but this is a tried and true favorite, right? Like, what else can you say about a deck that has remained pretty identical for the past, what, like 2-3 years now?
Yeah, it Brainstorm is a very weird inclusion, but other than that, the deck has been pretty much the same for forever.
Yeah. Again, not super surprising. Definitely something that I'd recommend for newer players. If you've played Delver style decks in other formats, it should be very intuitive to just pick this thing up and start playing with it. You get to play a bunch of sweet cantrips if you happen to be a modern player. You get to play all those sweet cantrips they don't let you have in modern. So that's enjoyable.
Sweet band cantrips.
All right. In 8th, we've got Inside Out Combo. Do you want to give me some takes on why you think this managed to sneak into the top 10?
Now, this is a deck that I don't like to play and that I don't particularly like to play against, but has quickly become sort of a defining deck in the format. Inside Out Combo is unique to Pauper, and the way that you might say Pod was unique to Modern, or Twin was unique to Modern, Inside Out is a deck unique to Pauper. Simply because if you look at it, it shouldn't work, but it does, and it's amazing. It's really the best combo deck that we have. And I know that you like to get generous with what is a combo deck, but it is the best true combo deck that we have in the format. It basically is like, did I Xerox my way into a hand with Tireless Tribe and then a way to dump all of my cards and then kill my opponent out of nowhere on turn 3? Like, it's actually pretty sweet, and it's so unique to the format.
Yeah, and I'm noticing a lot of the newer lists are starting to run stuff like Augur of Bolus, Seeker of the Way, maybe even both of them. And I think that these sorts of things as a backup plan do give it a little bit more resiliency. Like, I think people are starting to wise up that it's not enough to just run the tribe combo and every cantrip you possibly can. Sometimes you're going to need additional effects to sort of help work the engine of this deck. But it's been putting up numbers. I still think it's baffling to me that we're at a point in the metagame where this is, something that people are not only playing but seeing success with. But I'm glad that we finally have a combo deck. It's sitting here, according to Goldfish, it's taken up about 4.5% of the meta. I'm pretty comfortable with a combo deck sitting in that sort of realm, and it's not oppressive. Like, it's a deck you can interact with on a number of axes. So I think Inside Out Combo is, a fairly healthy part of the metagame.
Yeah, and it's basically the better version of Is It Blitz at this point in our current meta.
Yeah, I hadn't even thought about that, but Is It Blitz is way down in the metagame. So I guess sometimes, a slightly more fragile glass cannon, that packs a quicker punch is just fine. Next up, we have an interesting one here. Boggles is sitting fairly lowly down at like 4% of the metagame. And this deck, I've got to imagine, owes most of its meta share to the fact that people are playing red removal right now, and this deck kind of just invalidates that entire plan.
Yeah, we've only really listed one deck that could conceivably play Edicts, and it is Tron. But however, this deck is still very low, and I wonder how much of that has to do with people running flag bearers in their sideboards. Like Koldatha Boros, that was one of the old matchups that used to just eat alive, is because we had access to standard bearer in our sideboards, and it's so good against Boggle type strategies, and Stompy as well.
Yeah, and I'm also, I just tootle over to some lists, like just looking off the top, just the most recent Koldatha Boros list. There's 2 Fragmentize, a Prismatic Strands, and a Patrician Scorn in the board. Like, those are 4 copies of cards that can help that matchup pretty well. So it's not surprising to me that these decks have natural predators. The other thing is, seeing stuff like Elves and Inside Out Combo, those decks can, Elves can easily go wider than Boggles, and unless they find a way to trample through, can kind of stall the board out. They also get to run Well-Wisher, which helps, sort of stave off life loss. So it's not super surprising to me that Boggles is sort of being kept in check naturally by the rest of this metagame. And rounding out, we'll go with the top 10, and we're gonna talk about a deck. We're actually doing a deck tech as the second part of this episode. We're going to talk about a deck that's just outside the top 10, but it's been making some waves. But coming in at number 10 is Dimir Alchemy, and this is one of my favorite decks, and I'm not surprised to see it where it is. I still feel like it has a pretty solid game against a lot of this metagame, but it does kind of, I think at this point, suffer from the fact that Elves is never going to be a good matchup for this deck just because of the lack of, you either have to run a Wrath, quote unquote, effect, or you're just going to have a very bad time in that matchup. So, sort of praying for a shrivel or two is not a great position to find yourself in, especially when a lot of your removal does not line up super, super well against a very fast Elves start.
Yep.
Anything else you want to add to this?
I think you said it pretty succinctly.
All right. So we've discussed the top 10 decks in this metagame right now. And we had a deck that people have been clamoring for. Literally, I've gotten multiple messages over multiple different platforms about this thing. So today we are talking about the new kid on the block. We're talking about Mono White Heroic. And this deck's a little interesting. It's a little on the spicy side of things here. So let's get into doing this deck tech here, because I really want to talk about this list. So we're looking at the example from the Pauper Challenge that was piloted by Stroyer24, who took this to a 6-0. And this deck has, in the past couple of weeks, or the past week really, just sort of put up a pile of really solid results. So let's get into our creature base here. Starting off, we've got a classic from way back in Legion's, Deftblade Elite. Deftblade Elite is a 1/1 for white, and it has Provoke, an old ability, which I'm going to read out right now. When this attacks, you may have target creature defending player controls untap and block it if able. And then it has another line of text. It has an activated ability, 1 and a white, prevent all combat damage that we dealt to and dealt by Deftblade Elite this turn.
And this is played in another deck, isn't it?
What other deck plays this?
There's some sort of Marine Bro knows. There's some sort of other janky combo deck that he's run that plays this, and I don't really know. You'd have to. We'll ask him.
All
Comment
right.
on this, Marine Bro. Tell us.
All right, I'm curious as to what the other use of this is, but this thing basically lets you get a blocker out of the way. Most of the time, you're just going to use that Provoke ability to say, okay, this thing is going to block my 1/1 instead of blocking the thing that I've loaded enchantments onto. Next up, we've got our two actual creatures with Heroic. We've got Laganaban Trailblazer, which is white for an 0/4, and it has Heroic. Whenever you cast a spell that targets Laganaban Trailblazer, put a +1/+1 counter on it. And I actually really like this card just in general. Like, the 0/4 body for a white is pretty solid. Like, it dodges a lot of removal and can, stop Stonewall an early threat. So I've got to imagine that this is one of the more solid options. Also, it's a Centaur. How can you say no, Adrian?
Go forth with honor, return with glory, Mike.
And then the other heroic creature in this is a Crowan Skyguard, which is 1 and a white for a 1/1 with flying, and it has the same heroic text. Whenever you cast a spell that targets it, you put a +1/+1 counter on it. So we've got two copies of a very similar card. One has one more mana cost and a lot less toughness, but flies. And the other one has big old butt and is on the ground. So those are sort of the actual heroic things. And then rounding this out, we've got three copies of Seeker of the Way, which is 1 and a white for a 2/2 with prowess. And whenever you cast a non-creature spell, it gains lifelink until end of turn. Okay, so this creature base, what are your thoughts on it, Adrian?
Seems like I'm going to have to play a lot of spells.
It sure does. It's only 14 creatures in a color that's not exactly known for card draw.
I'm actually not really a huge fan of Deathblade Elite. I'm sure it has its uses, but just seeing it here, non-heroic, doesn't get pumped, doesn't even look like it's a 4 of in every list. So people are probably still playing around with that one.
I had heard some discussion in our Pauper group chat about possibly swapping out some copies of this for oh god, what is it? Expose Evil from Shadows over Innistrad. It is 2 and a white, I believe. It taps 2 creatures and then you investigate. So sort of swapping out. Again, you still have the ability to get blockers out of the way, but you're also getting to investigate. So that clue represents some card draw.
What you could also do with Expose Evil is you could attack, and then before blockers are declared, you could Expose Evil, targeting the blocker and targeting your heroic creature.
Ooh, I like this. So getting the extra heroic trigger, or if you're on the Seeker of the Way plan, just getting the prowess triggers off of it. I do like that. So let's move into our spells. So in terms of instants and sorceries, we've got 3. So we've got 4 copies each of Defiant Strike, which is white. Target creature gets +1/+0 until end of turn. Draw a card at instant speed. We have
pretty good. We have
Emerge Unscathed, which is 1 white for an instant. Target creature you control gains protection from the color of your choice until end of turn. Also notably has Rebound. And then finally, we have 4 copies Mutagenic Growth, which is a green for Phyrexian mana, so always going to be 2 life in this deck for an instant. Target creature gets +2/+2 until end of turn. So looking at this is... I remember Defiant Strike seeing some level of play when we were in the heroic deck in Khan's Theros Standard. But all of these seem like very... very useful options for triggering both heroic and prowess.
Well, getting the draw card is great. The rebound is great. And then obviously being free is great. So you just have a suite of very powerful, for this deck, very powerful combat tricks that ensure that you're going to get in for damage and, are more than just a one-time deal.
Yeah. I like the fact that these very neatly break down into like 3 categories of combat tricks that this deck wants. Now, for non-combat tricks, we still have a little bit. We've got 4 copies each of Cartouche of Solidarity, Ethereal Armor, Hyena Umbra, and Chomano's Blessing. So Cartouche of Solidarity is a white mana for an enchantment aura cartouche. Enchant creature you control. When it enters the battlefield, create a 1/1 white warrior creature token with vigilance. Enchanted creature gets +1/+1 and has first strike. Ethereal Armor gives enchants a creature. Enchanted creature gets +1/+1 for each enchantment you control and has first strike. Hyena Umbra, enchanted creature has +1/+1 and first strike. And it has Totem Armor. If enchanted creature would be destroyed, instead remove all damage from it and destroy this aura. And Chomano's Blessing is white for an aura with flash. When it comes into play, choose a color. Enchanted creature has protection from the chosen color. This effect doesn't remove Chomano's Blessing. So what we have here is Cartouche provides Edict protection and potentially a little bit more of a clock. Ethereal Armor provides a way to kind of just get a huge pump off a single card. Hyena Umbra, again, sort of helps protect you against removal, although in this case it's non-edict removal. And Chomano's Blessing lets you completely invalidate one color. So my first blush of this is I'm not a big fan of Chomano's Blessing. How about you, Adrian?
It helps you become unblockable against certain matchups, which is what my one of the games where I was playing Elves against this deck, they did. Could no longer block it. So it's not awful. It's also kind of a combat trick. I think its biggest downside is that a playset of this is $15 online because it's a masks block card.
Oh God, is it really?
Yeah, it's expensive. I don't think I think it's what this deck wants. It makes it so your guys are unblockable. You can use it as a trick in order to kill one of your opponent's things. It has a synergy with Ethereal Armor. I actually don't mind it. And also, it helps you dodge targeted removal.
All right, so I don't know. I guess I'm not 100% sold on Chomano's Blessing here, but I can certainly see the argument for it.
The nombo, of course, is that you cannot choose white. It won't remove Chomano's Blessing, but it'll mean you can't use the rest of your deck. So
yeah, I mean, I guess if you're on the Seeker of the Way plan, like you just need to cast the spells. They don't need to. I guess you do need valid targets for them. So I guess it only invalidates one thing, but I definitely see where that's a bit of a nombo. In terms of land base, we just have 17 planes and one secluded step, having that cycler in there just for the times when you draw land and you really don't need it. I wouldn't mind seeing a couple more cycling lands in here. It just feels like the sort of deck that really, really is dependent on draws. So having a way to make sure that you don't flood out seems really important to me. Moving into the sideboard, we've got some interesting choices in here. Starting with Death Speakers. Do you know this card, Adrian?
No. Tell me.
So Death Speakers is white for a 1/1 with protection from black. Then we have one copy Fragmentize, which is a white for a sorcery, destroy target artifact or enchantment with converted mana cost 3 or 4 or less. Excuse me. We have one copy of Lifelink, enchantment aura for a white, enchanted creature's Lifelink. Sacred Cat, the 1/1 with Lifelink for 1 white with Embalm of 1 white. We've got 2 copies Standard Bearer, the small flag bearer. We've got 3 copies of Dust to Dust, which is 1 white for remove 2 target artifacts from the game, and 2 copies Holy Light, which is 2 and a white for all non-white creatures get -1/-1 until end of turn. So is there anything you think is missing from this sideboard, or do you think this is good to go? Send it to press, all that good stuff.
Sacred Cat's kind of weird, right?
Yeah, especially with 3 main deck ways to like gain life. I'm not sure I absolutely love it. I do like the fact that you can embalm it to get it back later, but I don't know. This seems like maybe
It feels like more
not
copies
great.
of Lifelink. Feels like more copies of Lifelink would do the same thing.
Yeah, although Sacred Cat does let you up your creature density, so like having this as double edict protection over the course of the card's existence is kind of nice. I guess for the if you want to go wide rather than tall, that helps you out as well. So I'm not completely opposed to it. The 3 Dust to Dust seems very, very heavy-handed, but it is a very efficient removal spell for the affinity matchup, so I can't really fault it for that. The Holy Lights, I don't know. Holy Light, like 3 mana seems like a lot for this deck.
Well, it's certainly good against the Delver decks and good against the Fairy decks. Maybe you're worried enough about those matchups.
It's probably pretty decent against elves too, right?
Yes.
So I guess what are your overall thoughts on this deck? Because looking at it, my initial reaction was like, wow, this seems like a lot. Like I see the synergy here, but these pieces don't seem individually all that strong. Is this a funky, like offbeat version of Boggles in a way, or is this the real deal?
I think it's more like an offbeat, funky version of Boggles. The one other card I really did want to talk about is, what do you think of the 3 Death Speakers? What are they there for?
I've got to imagine. I frankly don't know. I wonder if this is a meta call because we've been seeing a resurgence in mono black as of late and seeing that put up some results. And maybe again, obviously with only the 5-0s being reported, we may not be seeing how much that deck is actually being played. If mono black is more of a threat than the results would lead us to think it is, or our play experience would lead us to think it is, I would hazard a guess that Death Speakers might be in there for that matchup. I don't know. The 1/1 for 1 with marginal upside, even as a sideboard card, seems a little dodgy to me personally.
Yeah, I agree. If we go into some of these other decks, some of them are main boarding Sacred Cat, which is interesting. Some of them have Beckett Apparition in the sideboard, which is probably there to interact with the graveyard. And a card called Shield of Duty and Reason, which I had not heard of before. Protection from green and blue for W. And then Oblivion Ring and Cop Green. So clearly they are trying to shore up against maybe elves.
Yeah, I can definitely see that. I like O-Ring as a generic answer to everything, pretty much. And I'm not so sure about Shield of Duty and Reason, especially because it's going to come in. I guess it does come in against elves and Delver, so that does take care of 2 very powerful things in the metagame. But this list that I'm looking at, I'm not seeing any sort of answer for like a quick affinity start here. So that's kind of getting me a little bit. I am seeing some of them sideboard gut shot as well. I think that's a little bit more reasonable than expecting to hit 3 mana for Holy Light. So I dig that. Obsidian Acolyte's an interesting one. The 1 and a white 1/1 with pro black, and for 1 white, target creature gains protection from black until end of turn. I kind of like that a little bit more than Death Speakers personally. And I do happen to know that that card is reasonably expensive online, so I wonder if that's part of the reason that some of these lists aren't running it.
Yeah, because giving something pro black is also good.
Yeah, like it's got a good threat of activation against the decks running black removal. Yeah, so looking through these, it seems like the core of the deck is around 14 to 16 creatures. In terms of your spells, Emerge Unscathed and Mutagenic Growth seem to just always be 4 ofs, and then the Aura Suite is pretty standard, and everyone seems to agree on about 18 lands. The sideboard is really where we're seeing a big difference, and it may also help contribute to the difference in terms of results. Heliotech is putting up consistent results with this, so he's sort of, plowing ahead with this. I guess, is there any other like interesting tech that you could think of that we could perhaps introduce into this deck to sort of, spice things up a little bit?
Well, here's something I just thought of. I think one of the biggest problems with Boggles is that it tends to go into too many colors. You have the greedy Boggles decks that are trying to play Manamorphose and blah, 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 and being green and white. And, maybe if you just take it down to one color, like I did lose a game to this deck as Elves, and it was unbeatable in the game that I lost to it. So if your opponent doesn't have any removal and you can just Voltron up one of these bad boys and start attacking your opponent for 5 with lifelink each turn, starting on like turn 3, like I think the deck does have the potential to be powerful. So I kind of take back what I said. I don't think it's just janky Boggles. I think that being one color and then having access to all these different protection spells, like Emerge Unscathed or Mutagenic Growth or Chamana's Blessing, does actually push the deck a little bit more than I think I initially gave it credit for.
Yeah, and I think the fact that this actually gets to comparing this, the first thing that comes to mind for me is the old mono red heroic deck that's kind of faded from existence. That deck always sort of suffered from the issue of it had no real way to protect its threats against some types of removal, and sometimes you just got stonewalled because you didn't see the right cards. So I kind of like the fact that this is running assorted ways to protect its own creatures. I'm kind of surprised not to see any copies of God's Willing in any of these decks. The instant from Theros that's 1 white, target creature gains indestructible until end of turn, scry 1. I kind of feel like that would be a pretty decent pick here sometimes. I think you probably want to merge Unscathed before it, but I think having some number of those in the 75 might be a good call to sort of fend off some spot removal.
Scrying does seem powerful. Like you said, it is a protection spell, so I do like that. Are these really the best white heroic creatures that we have in the format?
That's a good question there, buddy.
Because isn't there a 3-drop like Pegasus thing? Hold on, I'm pulling it up.
It's been a while since I've looked, but let's double check. I'm just gonna pump in the word heroic and send it to commons in a search engine, and we're gonna see what shows up. Now you got to remember there are things that work in these style of decks that don't actually have the word heroic on it, but okay, you're talking about Wingsteed Rider, 1 white for a 2/2 flying heroic, which whenever you cast a spell that targets it, you put a +1/+1 counter on it. Is that the one you're thinking of?
Yeah, wow, that's the only other good one. The other two here are Elite Skirmisher, which taps creatures, and the other one gains you life, Setessan Battle Priest. So these really are the two best ones, and then Wingsteed Rider maybe a distant third.
Yeah, this Wingsteed Rider just strikes me as like you're paying 1 more white, or in this case just 1 more mana because you are mono white. But you're only getting 1 more power and toughness. If this was like a 2/3 or something like that, I'd feel a lot better about it. And looking through the other heroic creatures, like the 2 red ones at common, a Crone Crusader and Satyr Hoplite, are definitely standouts, but they're not quite the same. I guess I'm curious because the mono red heroic deck got to run things like Kiln Fiend because they were just very efficient threats and you were already casting a bunch of stuff. I'm kind of curious if there's anything like that in white. I'm looking here. Ugh, God, I'm seeing.
Here's a take. Would you run Hopeful Eidolon in this deck?
Is that the lifelink one?
Yeah, that's the Bestow with lifelink. Bestow, for those of you who didn't play during Theros, means you cast it as an enchantment targeting a creature.
Yeah, I kind of like the idea of doing Bestow things in general. That was one of those things that Theros block, I think, did very elegantly overall, was the fact that, you had these, in order to mitigate the fact that auras are usually bad, both in limited and constructed in a lot of formats, they sort of went for this idea of you can cast this creature as an aura, and if the creature's enchanting dies, it turns into a creature. I guess what options are there besides the Eidolon at common in white? I'm thinking, and
great question. That keyword is bestow. Why don't I look that up instead of heroic?
Okay, so there's Nyxborn Shieldmate, which is 1 white for a 1/2, and it has bestow 2 and a white, and enchanted creature is +1/+2. That's not super exciting. I guess with Hopeful Eidolon, the biggest thing is like 4 mana is a lot to ask off of 18 lands here. There's also Observant Alseid, which is 2 and a white for a 2/2, and it has bestow for 4 and a white, and it has vigilance, and enchanted creature gets +2/+2 and has vigilance. So I think the big thing here is just a lot of these are very over costed for enchantments, and while it does leave a body behind, I have a hard time like thinking that Cartouche of Solidarity isn't probably better than most of these.
Yeah, I agree.
Even what is that card? We just talked about this. The one in Rivals, the one that replaces itself or comes with a token. God.
Yeah, the one that's not as good as the vampire. I know what you're talking about.
Yeah. It's like I
vampire replacement guy.
I can picture the art in my mind. Like I know what this card looks like. I just can't come up with a name because the set was very forgettable. Just pulling it up here. God,
I'm falling asleep.
Squire's Devotion, the 2 and a white enchanted creature. Enchanted creature is +1/+1 on his lifelink, and when it enters the battlefield, you get a 1/1 with lifelink. I think that's just better than Nyxborn Shieldmate, and it's close when you're comparing it to the lifelink Eidolon. I don't know. This list seems, while it's still in its early days, it does seem pretty tight in terms of running the best of these sorts of effects. I guess my question is, just looking at this list, I did see a couple with Benevolent Bodyguard. How do you feel about that in the 75 somewhere?
I like it as another body guard, but it doesn't actually count as like a targeted spell. So I think your mileage will vary. It's much better against like spot removal, or maybe the deck just is lacking a critical number of turn 1 plays, which may be why you'd want to play it. But I'm not the biggest fan of it. I don't think it really helps do what you're trying to do.
That's totally fair. I like the aspect of it that you get to protect something at instant speed. I think that's really useful, and the fact that it is an onboard trick, they can't really keep up counter magic for it. I'm also noticing some of these lists are running Gitaxian Probe, which I think is incorrect personally. I know that it is functionally kind of free, and it does let you know what your opponent's working with, but for me, I much prefer that deck, and I much prefer that in like a style of deck like Blue-Red Blitz, where you actually have a way to interact with your stuff instead of just going, okay, I can see what's in your hand, and now I have to play around these cards. So I'm not in love with that there. I don't know. I think that this is a really solid start to something. And I think, as you pointed out, not having to rely on hitting a second color, I think is really, really powerful for this deck. I think it's a really, really strong aspect to it. And I think that this might have some sort of staying power to it. A couple of weeks ago, we did talk about that blue-white Seeker of the Way, Jeskai Spellfist deck. And I guess what I'm trying to get at there is this deck just sort of the more efficient version of what that was trying to do?
I think both decks have ups and downs. Personally, I'm trying to think of one.
Well, I mean, so the blue one gets to play counter magic and also gets to play more evasive threats. Whereas this, gets mana consistency. It doesn't have to play, like, there are versions of this that are playing 0 enter the battlefield tapped lands. So I've got to imagine that, like, that does present a very tangible benefit. Like, you're never taking a turn off to go fetch something. So I think that's got to weigh in as a non-zero amount. And on top of that, the fact that, it's just very, very low to the ground. There are no cards in the main deck of several versions of this deck that cost more than 2. So I don't know. I'm interested to see where this archetype takes itself, to see if it, manages to secure itself a more solid place in the metagames. Because right now we have results from this as early as the 2nd of January. And right now, out of the entire metagame, this is accounting for 2.9. So 3% of the metagame results for the past 4 weeks in just over a week. We're recording this on the 10th, so it's been 8 days since the first 5-0. Those are some pretty impressive numbers in my mind.
I agree. I think that the deck has a lot of potential. I think some good players are playing the deck also. I'm also excited for its future.
I guess the other thing that I'm curious in is, when do you think this deck gets worse when the metagame shifts? Because I just want to say, I think this deck is going to have a bad time if mono black ever really makes like a full return.
Yeah, I can see that. A lot of instant speed interaction is probably not good.
Yeah, just the fact that, like, mono black traditionally is a deck that runs a lot of removal spells. You do have 14 or 16 creatures in this deck, but a lot of them are fairly low impact if you don't have time to sort of build up on them. That's kind of one of the issues with these go tall rather than go wide sort of aggressive strategies. So I think this is a relatively safe deck unless mono black sort of manages to worm its way back into the metagame in a meaningful way. In terms of cost, this deck is relatively cheap, all things considered. It's going to run you about $30 online and about 18 in paper. And looking at this in paper, your cost is pretty evenly split up. Those mutagenic growths have actually gotten up to about $1 a piece. So those are a little pricey. And then online, mutagenic, again, over $1. Standard bearer is $3 a piece. Holy Light's $1 a piece. And Chomano's Blessing, as aforementioned, has spiked to almost $4, costing about $15 at date of recording for the full playset. So that's about half the price. So if you have an idea of something that could replace Chomano's Blessing, I might suggest that you test that out if you're a little gun shy on this. Looking at all the creatures and the spells in here, the expensive parts of this deck online don't really have a lot of other applications. Your standard bearers are going to show up in sideboards from time to time. Your mutagenics are going to show up in different similarly themed aggressive decks. And in paper, mutagenics applicable in other places, and the rest of the deck is very cheap in paper. The Hyena Umbras are really only used in Boggles, but those are kind of pricey in paper. So I guess, would you say this is a buy, Adrian, if someone's interested in this?
Yeah, absolutely. If you like this kind of strategy, if you're just looking to get into the format, I think this is a fine place to start.
Yeah, and even though, a lot of the cost is in a handful of cards, this deck is still, less than the cost of a movie ticket and popcorn in paper. And it's the cost of a decent meal pre-tip online. So this is still very cheap, again, with the increased public consciousness, public attention on Pauper as a format. There's a lot of people trying to get into the game, and not everyone is keen on spending a lot of money on a new format that they're not entirely sure on. So I think this is a great entry point for newer players into the game. It's not an overly convoluted combo deck. It's pretty simple in terms of its overall game plan. So it's something that, while as with many aggro decks, it's easy to pick up, and it's probably fairly difficult to master. I may actually pick up some chunks of this for online and test it out myself. I'm kind of curious to see how this thing plays.
Do it. Tell me how it goes.
Yeah.
Make some videos.
Yeah, maybe I will. I did really love Mono Red Heroic for the hot minute where it was like very, very good, but that was a very, very hot minute, and those days are long gone. Also, I got
the flame burned too bright.
Yeah, I also got back into Magic in Khan's Theros standard, so I have a soft spot for Heroic because I definitely built a casual Heroic deck to play with friends. All right, so metagame is in a healthy place. We've had some new changes. Things are always shifting a little bit. This time a little bit more so than usual, but before I let you take us out of the show, I do want to talk about one more thing that happened today. Did you see the news as to the bug that got fixed on MitGo, Adrian?
Was it Oubliette? No, I didn't see it, but that's my guess.
Yes, Oubliette no longer does that thing where if you try and remove it from play, the game freezes. So we are now at a point where we have only one other bugged card that ever really sees play that I know of. I don't think they fixed the Spinning Darkness glitch where it alternately either won't let you exile cards as an alternate cost or lets you exile any black cards out of your graveyard, not just the top 3. So hopefully, Wizards Digital can get on that at some point so that no one has to worry about being, people supposing that they're cheating by playing these slightly bugged cards. With that said, I think that takes us through the entire week worth of Pauper relevant news, and unless you have anything else to add, Adrian, I think we're ready for you to take us out of the show.
All right, let's do it. Thanks everyone for joining us today. This podcast is brought to support of our patrons. This week, I'm going to give a special shout out to my man Marine Bro. I know I mentioned him earlier on the show, but he's been a big listener. I bounce ideas off of him all the time, whether or not Mike knows it, and he's a good guy. So thanks for listening, Marine Bro. Your contributions are very much appreciated. As for the rest of you, I'll say you soon. Don't worry. And as for the rest of you who are not patrons, please consider supporting us if you like the show. Check below this video, the description of this podcast for details on where to find us. We'd like to remind you, for listening to this on a platform with reviews, they're always appreciated because they boost our visibility. If you've got a deck list or idea for a topic, you can contact us either via our website or by emailing us directly at colorcommentary@gmail.com. Special thanks go to Pat's Games, my Austin LGS, Mike's LGS, JP Comics, and of course, the ever musical L, who brings you our theme song, Quantitative. You can find that and other great tracks at soundcloud.net/ELLELLELL. Till next week, this is Adrian and Mike, and we are signing off for Color Commentary.